we're now looking at the prophets, some of the major prophets and some of the minor ones who prophesied during the time of the exile after 586 BC. And we start with Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, he's writing kind of 7 years before to 15 years after the exile. And sometimes you read Ezekiel and you think, what is this guy on? Like, is he on some kind of drugs that are making him hallucinate? Because he sees all these visions, these incredible creatures, the glory of God. He sees these wheels within wheels and rivers and wind and these dry bones becoming an army. And it's like, it's so awesome that he can't describe it. And he sees God, but it's like not the glory of God, and it's not the glory of God. It's the likeness of the glory of God, and no, it's not like that. And eventually he says I saw the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and that's how awesome it is. And he's trying to describe it, and he's putting it into all these words, and then within the midst of this. In the midst of all of this glory around God's throne, there's a man sitting on a throne. There is a man sitting on a throne in the presence of God, and he sees that. And in chapter 10 he says that the glory of the Lord, he saw the glory of God leave the temple. And there's no record actually of the glory of the Lord returning to the temple after that, which is interesting. And then in Ezekiel 34, he starts to say God is going to restore the people. God is going to bring them back. He's going to rescue them. He's going to judge them. He's going to give them a good shepherd. In fact, he himself is going to be their good shepherd. And then later in Ezekiel 36, he says these wonderful words in 25 to 27. I'll sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I'll cleanse you from all your impurities, from all your idols. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I'll remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. That reminds us, doesn't it, of Jeremiah when he says that I'm going to give you a new. I'm going to put my law in your minds and hearts. He's doing it, something within us that changes us. I'll put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to follow all my laws. And you'll be my people and I'll be your God. And Israel and Ezekiel gives them that promise. And then we get to Daniel. Daniel's based around the time of the exile. He's taken into captivity in Babylon with the other exiles. So when the people are taken into exile, it's not like all the people, every single one of them, and so there's no one left in the land. They take the key people, the leaders, the strongest people, the cleverest people, the ones who make it happen, so that those who are left without any leaders and all the experts have gone and everyone who could help them, and so they're left devastated. And Daniel's one of those important people who is, or at least able people who is taken into exile. And it's partly narrative, you know, those great stories that you might have heard, like Daniel and the Lion's Den, and the writing on the wall, the kind of things you read when you're at Sunday school, when you're a kid. But then there's this, and then it goes into this kind of apocalyptic type writing where he's prophesying and he's seeing some visions. And he sees this strange kind of divine human figure called that he calls a Son of Man. And if you read Daniel 7, it's fascinating how this Son of Man is described, because he says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. He approached the Ancient of Days, that's God, and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and this is the man, he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Think about the fact that Jesus calls himself the Son of Man, probably more than any other self-description, and this divine human figure who goes into the presence of God, and people of every language worship him. And God doesn't say, don't do that. God gives him the authority and the glory and the power, and somehow this incredible scene is happening, and it's foreseen, and Daniel sees something that perhaps he couldn't explain at the time, but when you look back at it from a Christian point of view, it's absolutely incredible. Another prophet who prophesied during the exile was Obadiah. Obadiah's very short prophecy, it's just got one chapter to it, so if you want to feel very holy and want to read a whole book of the Bible today, 21 verses, you can do that, read Obadiah. And again, Obadiah has this bit at the end in verse 21, and he says, the kingdom will be the Lord's. The kingdom will be the Lord's. They were during this time that the Jews are saying, when will God give us the kingdom back? What do we need to do? What will happen? And Obadiah says, the kingdom will be the Lord's. Once again, it will be the Lord's. God will vindicate his people eventually. He'll forgive them. God will become king again on earth as he is in heaven, and which is kind of basically what the Gospels are all about. One other book that was written during the time of the exile, or it's based during the time of the exile, is Esther. And another great story about God working behind the scenes. Esther is the name of my wife, and when my dad first met her, pretty much the first thing he said to her when I said, Dad, this is Esther, my dad said, Esther, that's the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. Now, it wasn't the best start to their friendship, but they do get on quite well now. And that's true, and that's one of the things that's known about Esther in the Bible, that it's the one book that doesn't mention God. But it's all about God working behind the scenes, and you just get this sense that even though perhaps it wasn't appropriate to mention God, God is there anyway. There's one scholar that I was reading who said that there are 4 bits in the book of Esther in the Hebrew which are acrostic poems that spell the name of God. So they spell the name Yahweh at 4 different types times in the book of Esther. And you know, if that's true, that's an amazing thing, and it's just written into the very text, is that when God doesn't appear to be there, and when you're in exile, and when you've been, you know, when life is going really tough, actually God is still there. He's written into the very text of that book, and he's at work, and he's helping, and he's giving Esther courage to go into the presence of the king and present her request, and whenever you feel like that God's not there, that he's still at work, and to trust him in that way. And so it's after about 50 years in exile, in about 536, when Cyrus the Great allows the exiles to return. And not only that, but he's described by Isaiah, Cyrus, as God's anointed one. So God has anointed this pagan king who doesn't believe in God to accomplish his purposes. And that's what God does. God doesn't just use people who are Christians, or you know, that believe in God, but he will anoint people, whoever he chooses, to accomplish his purposes, to do good things that are good and right. And God does that with Cyrus. And so in Ezra, you get this story of the people returning to Jerusalem after being exiled and rebuilding the temple. And so Ezra helps the people rebuild the temple, and Nehemiah helps to rebuild the city, especially the city walls. And so in the last video of the Old Testament, we're going to look at the prophets who prophesied during this period of time.